These humans fight like apex predators, he told his officers. And for the first time in his long career, he began to wonder if the Hakam, after 18 hours of continuous battle, the Hakmor fleet was shattered and scattered across the Kepler 442 system, with over half of their 3,000 ships either destroyed or disabled, while the remainder struggled to maintain formation as human forces continued their relentless attacks. Supreme War Alpha Krathvon stood in what remained of his command center aboard the flagship Bone Crusher, watching his tactical display show red indicators where his ships had been, and feeling something he had never experienced before in 50 years of conquest campaigns, which was fear. Admiral, his communication officer reported with barely controlled panic in his voice. The humans are demanding that we surrender immediately, or they will destroy the rest of our fleet. Krathvon looked around his damaged bridge where smoke drifted from overloaded systems, and injured officers struggled to maintain their posts, while outside his viewports he could see human ships moving in the same coordinated patterns that had been destroying his forces for nearly a full day. The Supreme War Alpha had commanded the conquest of 47 worlds and the extermination of billions of sentient beings, but he had never faced an enemy that fought with such ruthless efficiency while showing mercy to survivors and protecting civilians. Open a channel to the human, Admiral, he ordered, because even his massive pride could not ignore the reality that his fleet was beaten, and continuing to fight would only result in the complete destruction of everything he commanded. The main screen activated and showed him the face of Admiral So Young, who looked tired, but completely in control as she sat in her command chair surrounded by officers who showed the same quiet confidence. Supreme War Alpha Krathvon, this is Admiral So Young of the human Deep Space Fleet, she said in a voice that carried no emotion except cold determination. You have 30 seconds to order the surrender of all remaining Hakmor vessels. Krathvon felt his anger rising, because no one had ever spoken to him with such authority. But when he looked at his tactical display, he realized that he was surrounded by human ships and his own vessels were too damaged to fight effectively. I am Supreme War Alpha of the 3rd Conquest Fleet, he replied, trying to maintain some dignity. In defeat, I do not surrender to inferior species. Admiral So Young leaned forward in her chair, and her expression became even colder as she responded to his defiance. Supreme War Alpha, you have lost over half of your fleet, and the remainder are trapped in a system that my forces control completely, she said. You can surrender now and save the lives of your remaining crews, or you can continue fighting and watch them all die. She activated a display that showed the positions of every Hakmor ship in the system and how they were surrounded by human vessels that could destroy them at any moment, your choice. She continued, but either way, the killing stops now. For the first time in his life, Krathvon found himself in a position where he had no good options, because continuing to fight would result in the destruction of his entire fleet, while surrendering would mean admitting that the Hakmor Empire could be defeated by a species they had never heard of. Admiral So Young seemed to understand his hesitation because she spoke again before he could respond. Supreme War Alpha, I want to show you something that might help you make the right decision, she said, and the display changed to show recordings from the battle. Krathvon watched in silence as the tactical recording showed how human forces had systematically dismantled his fleet using coordination and tactics that were completely unlike anything he had ever encountered. Your ships are powerful and your warriors are fierce, she continued, but you fight as individuals while humans fight as a unified force, and that makes all the difference. The recordings showed human ships working together in ways that seemed impossible, with civilian vessels supporting military units and small fighters, coordinating with massive battleships to achieve effects that were greater than the sum of their parts. We learned to fight this way because we evolved on a world that was trying to kill us every day, Admiral So Young explained, and the only way to survive was to work together and protect each other. She paused to let that information sink in before continuing with her explanation. You conquered other species because they were peaceful, or because they fought the same way you do, she said. But humans are different, and if you continue this war, you will discover just how different we can be. Krathvon realized that he was not just being offered surrender terms, but was receiving an education in why his empire had failed for the first time in its history. What are your demands, he asked finally, because even though it went against everything, He believed he could see that Admiral So Young was giving him a chance to save what remained of his forces. First, all Hakmor vessels will immediately stand down and prepare to be boarded by human inspection teams. She replied to ensure that you have no weapons capable of threatening civilian populations. Second, you will provide complete intelligence about Hakmor military capabilities and the locations of all conquest fleets currently operating in this sector of the galaxy. Third, the Hakmor Empire will pay reparations to the Velthari people for the terror and suffering you have caused, and you will submit to monitoring by human observers to ensure compliance. Krathvan felt his pride rebelling against these terms because no one had ever dictated conditions to the Hakmor Empire. But when he looked at his tactical display, he knew that he had no choice. And if I refuse, he asked, even though he already knew the answer. Then this conversation ends and the battle resumes. Admiral So Young replied, until every Hakmor ship in this system has been destroyed and every crew member is dead. The Supreme War Alpha looked around, his damaged bridge at the officers who had served him faithfully through dozens of campaigns, and realized that their lives depended on his decision. Very well, he said finally. I accept your terms and order all Hakmor vessels to stand down immediately. Admiral So Young nodded and activated her fleet communication system to broadcast the ceasefire order to all human ships, while Krathvan sent similar orders to his remaining forces. Within hours, Major Jinwoo's Marines were boarding Hakmor vessels to supervise their surrender, while Commander Boram's intelligence teams began gathering information about the enemy empire's military structure and strategic plans. Captain Kyung-ho found himself aboard the Hakmor flagship as part of the inspection team, and he was amazed by the size and complexity of the alien vessel, even though it had been designed primarily for destruction rather than exploration. The Hakmor crew members he encountered seemed stunned by their defeat, because they had never imagined that their empire could be challenged by anyone, let alone by a species they had never heard of before. Meanwhile, on the surface of the Velthari homeworld, billions of grateful aliens were celebrating their rescue and singing songs of praise for the humans who had risked everything to save them from extinction. Ambassador Taemin sent a message to Admiral So Young, thanking her for the rescue, and explaining that the Velthari government had voted to establish a permanent alliance with humanity. We will never forget what you have done for us, he said, and we want the galaxy to know that the Velthari people will always stand with humanity against those who would harm innocent lives. But the most important result of the battle came when news of the human victory spread throughout galactic civilization and reached the Galactic Council chambers on the neutral world of Concordia. For the first time in centuries, the Council found themselves forced to acknowledge that a new military power had emerged in their region of space, and that this power was not interested in joining their exclusive club of established civilizations, species that had ignored or dismissed humanity as another barbaric Deathworld race, suddenly began sending diplomatic messages requesting formal relations and trade agreements. The Zephyrian ambassador, who had refused to help the Velthari, now sent urgent communications explaining that his government wanted to discuss mutual defense treaties with the human government. Captain Kyung-ho received orders to establish a permanent human base in the Kepler 442 system, both to protect the Velthari and to serve as a monitoring station for Hakmor compliance with the surrender terms. 6 months later, he found himself walking through the rebuilt Velthari capital city, where statues of human ships had been erected in the central plaza, and children played games where they pretended to be human marines fighting monsters. Ambassador Taemin met him at the spaceport and explained that the Velthari Parliament had voted to name their largest moon So Young in honor of the human admiral, who had saved their civilization. As they walked through the city, Kyung-ho saw Velthari engineers working alongside human technicians to develop new technologies that combined the peaceful aliens' industrial capabilities with human defensive innovations. The galaxy has changed, Captain Taemin said, as they stopped to watch Velthari children playing. With toy human starships, everyone knows now that there is a species that will not tolerate genocide, and that will fight to protect the innocent. Kyung-ho nodded and looked up at the stars, where he knew that human exploration fleets were already heading into uncharted space, carrying the message that the Deathworlders were no longer content to stay in their corner of the universe. The Hakmor Empire had learned that there were consequences Supreme War Alpha Krathvon stood in the command center of his flagship Bone Crusher and watched the tactical display show the complete destruction of his Vanguard fleet, with disbelief turning to rage as he realized that an unknown species had just humiliated the Hakmor Empire. The creatures call themselves humans, his intelligence officer reported, and they appeared to have only 400 ships, but they destroyed War Alpha Gethkar's entire force in less than 4 hours. Krathvon was larger than most Hakmor, standing nearly 3 meters tall with scars covering his gray skin from dozens of conquest campaigns, and his yellow eyes burned with fury as he processed this impossible information. 400 ships destroyed 200 Hakmor warships, he repeated in a voice that made his subordinates step back in fear. Impossible. No species in the galaxy has weapons technology that advanced. The intelligence officer activated a display showing the recorded battle transmissions, and Krathvon watched human ships moving in patterns that seemed random, but were actually coordinated attacks that used speed and surprise to overcome superior firepower. They do not fight like any species we have encountered before, the officer continued. They use their smaller ships like pack hunters, surrounding and destroying individual vessels before our forces could respond effectively. Krathvon slammed his massive fist down on the command table, hard enough to crack the metal surface, because in over 50 years of conquest he had never seen a Hakmor fleet defeated so completely. Signal all conquest fleets in this sector, he ordered. I want every available ship here immediately, and send word to the Emperor that we have found a species that might actually pose a threat to the Empire. Within hours, Hakmor reinforcements began arriving from across their territory, until Krathvon commanded the largest fleet in Hakmor history, over 3,000 warships, representing the combined might of an empire that had conquered dozens of worlds. Meanwhile, in the Kepler 442 system, Admiral So Young was working with Velthari leaders to prepare defenses around their homeworld, because her scouts had detected the massive Hakmor reinforcement fleet heading toward them. Captain Heijin had been working with Velthari engineers to convert their mining stations and orbital platforms into defensive weapons using human technology, combined with alien industrial equipment. Admiral, the Velthari have some amazing capabilities that they never thought to use for warfare. Heijin reported their gravity manipulation systems can create artificial gravity wells that will pull enemy ships off course. She activated a display showing the modifications they had made to the Velthari orbital infrastructure, and So Young was impressed by how quickly the peaceful aliens had adapted their tools for war. We have also helped them weaponize their asteroid mining lasers, she continued, and their cargo handling systems can launch massive projectiles at high velocity. Commander Boram brought her stealth frigates back from their scouting mission with intelligence that made everyone realize how desperate their situation had become. Admiral, the incoming Hakmor fleet consists of over 3,000 combat vessels, she reported, including their flagship, which is larger than anything in our database. Major Jinwoo studied the sensor readings from Boram's reconnaissance and shook his head in amazement at the size of the enemy force. Admiral, even with our defensive preparations, we are outnumbered almost 8-1, he said, and the main Hakmor fleet will have learned from the mistakes of their vanguard. Admiral So Young looked around the briefing room at her senior officers and saw the same determination in their eyes that had carried humans through every crisis in their history. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to face the largest military force that humans have ever encountered, she began. But we have advantages that the Hakmor cannot understand or counter. She activated the tactical display showing the Velthari system with all of its planets, moons, and orbital installations marked in detail. First, we know this system better than they do because we have spent the last 3 days mapping every asteroid field and gravity. Well, that we can use to our advantage. Commander Boram nodded in agreement because her stealth ships had been placing sensor beacons and communication relays throughout the system to create a network that would give human forces perfect intelligence about enemy movements. Second, the Velthari have agreed to help us in ways that their pacifist nature would normally never allow. So Young continued, because they understand that sometimes violence is the only way to prevent greater violence. Captain Heijin brought up displays showing the converted Velthari installations and explained how the alien technology could be used to create tactical advantages that the Hakmor would never expect. Their gravity manipulation systems can create artificial asteroid fields by pulling debris together into barriers that will block enemy movement, she said. and their mining lasers can cut through Hawkmoor armor like it was made of soft metal. Third and most important, we are fighting to protect innocent lives while the Hawkmoor are fighting to feed their hunger. So Young continued, and that means we will take risks and make sacrifices that they cannot understand. Major Jinwoo activated a display showing his marine deployment plan, which involved using small craft to board and capture Hawkmoor vessels during the battle. Admiral, my Marines are prepared to conduct boarding actions against enemy command ships, he reported. If we can capture their flagship and take their Supreme War Alpha prisoner, it might cause their entire fleet to surrender. The plan they developed was unlike anything that had ever been attempted in galactic warfare because it used the three-dimensional nature of space combat in ways that most species had never considered. Instead of meeting the Hawkmoor fleet in a traditional battle line, the human forces would spread throughout the system using planets and moons as cover while striking at enemy formations from multiple directions simultaneously. When the Hawkmoor arrived, they found the Velthari system apparently empty, except for the planet they had come to attack. But Supreme War Alpha Krathvon was suspicious because his sensors detected no human ships in the area. Where are the mammals, he demanded of his tactical officers. They cannot have fled because our scouts would have detected their departure before anyone could answer him the first. Human attack began as Commander Bo-Ram's stealth frigates decloaked simultaneously throughout the Hawkmoor formation and launched coordinated torpedo strikes at their command vessels. The massive enemy fleet tried to respond but found themselves fighting ghosts that appeared and vanished while their missiles and plasma bolts struck empty space, where human ships had been only moments before. Captain Kyung-ho led a squadron of converted civilian ships out from behind the fourth planet where they had been hiding in the sensor shadow and began attacking the rear of the Hawkmoor formation, while broadcasting false signals that made it appear as if they were a much larger force. Lieutenant Min Soo was flying escort for a group of mining barges that suddenly revealed themselves to be carrying massive railgun systems that fired tungsten projectiles at significant fractions of light speed straight through Hawkmoor. Heavy cruisers, Admiral So Young brought her main battle group up from the southern pole of the Velthari homeworld where the planet's magnetic field had been hiding their signatures, and opened fire on the enemy flagship with every weapon her fleet possessed. But Supreme War Alpha Krathvon was not as easily surprised as his subordinate had been, and he began adapting his tactics to counter the human strategies by splitting his massive fleet into smaller groups that could support each other. The battle became a three-dimensional chess game played across millions of cubic kilometers of space as human forces tried to prevent the Hawkmoor from using their overwhelming numbers, while the aliens attempted to pin down their elusive opponents long enough to destroy them. Major Jinwoo launched his boarding assault, using fast attack craft that could penetrate Hawkmoor defenses and deliver Marines directly to enemy ships, where they fought room by room to capture vital systems. The fighting was brutal and desperate as human soldiers faced Hawkmoor warriors in close combat where the aliens' size and natural weapons should have given them every advantage. But the Marines had trained for exactly this kind of combat, and they used tactics that emphasized teamwork and superior equipment over individual strength, while their powered armor allowed them to match Hawkmoor physical abilities. Captain Da-Yoon coordinated the electronic warfare effort from her position aboard Terra's Wrath, using human computer systems to hack into Hawkmoor networks and disrupt their communications while feeding false information to their tactical systems. The Velthari proved to be surprisingly effective allies as their gravity manipulation systems began creating artificial obstacles that forced Hawkmoor ships out of formation, while their converted mining equipment destroyed enemy vessels with industrial precision. Hours passed and the battle raged across the entire system, as human forces used every advantage they could create, while the Hawkmoor slowly began to realize that they were not fighting a conventional enemy, but something completely new and terrifyingly effective. Supreme War Alpha Krathvon watched his fleet being systematically destroyed by opponents who refused to fight fair, and he began to understand that he was facing a species that had evolved different concepts of warfare than any other race in the galaxy. The cheering grew louder, and So Young smiled as she realized that the Hawkmoor Empire was about to learn why humans had survived and thrived. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, and immediately began spreading out into attack formation. while Commander Boram's stealth ships moved ahead like invisible scouts to gather information about what waited for them. Captain Kyung-ho stood on the bridge of Terra's Wrath, watching his sensors as they detected the massive signatures of Hawkmoor warships already in the system, and the readings made his blood run cold, because there were more enemy vessels than anyone had expected. Admiral, the Hawkmoor Vanguard consists of over 200 combat vessels, he reported to So Young over the communication link, and they are already moving toward the Velthari homeworld. On the main screen, the tactical display showed red dots representing enemy ships arranged in a formation that looked like a spear aimed directly at the third planet, where 2 billion innocent people waited helplessly for rescue or death. Admiral So Young's voice came through the speakers calm and steady. Despite the overwhelming odds they faced, all ships, this is Admiral So Young, we are going to announce our presence to the Hawkmoor, and give them one chance to withdraw peacefully before we show them what humans do to bullies. The communication system activated and sent a message toward the Hawkmoor fleet using the same emergency frequency that the Velthari had used to call for help. Hawkmoor fleet, this is Admiral So Young of the Human Deep Space Fleet. She began. You are ordered to withdraw immediately from this system and return to your own territory. The response came back within minutes, and when it appeared on the main screen, Captain Kyung-ho felt his stomach turn because he was looking at the face of something that belonged in nightmares rather than reality. The Hawkmoor War Alpha was over 2 meters tall, with gray-green skin covered in scales and teeth that looked like they could bite through metal. Its yellow eyes showed no emotion except hunger, and when it spoke, its voice sounded like grinding stone. I am War Alpha Gethkar of the Hawkmoor 3rd Conquest Fleet, it said, and you soft mammals have made a mistake by coming here. The creature leaned closer to its communication screen, and Kyung-ho could see dried blood on its claws and teeth, as if it had been feeding recently. Your species is unknown to us, but that will not matter when we add your ships to our collection and your crews to our food stores. Gethkar continued. We have conquered 47 worlds and eaten the populations of 36 of them. The War Alpha activated a display behind him, showing images that made several human officers turn away from their screens because they showed cities burning and creatures that looked like the Velthari being herded into what could only be processing facilities. This is what happened to the last species that tried to interfere with a Hawkmoor conquest, Gethkar said. With what might have been a smile if smiles could be made of knives, your people will join them in our feeding pens after we finish with the plant eaters on the Third World. Admiral So Young's response was broadcast to both fleets, and her voice carried across space with the authority of someone who had never backed down from a fight. War Alpha Gethkar. This is Admiral So Young, and I want to make something very clear to you, she began. Humans do not negotiate with cannibals, and we do not allow genocide to happen when we have the power to stop it. She paused for a moment, and when she continued, her voice had become as cold as the space between stars. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawing from this system, or we will remove you by force, and I promise you that fighting humans is very different from eating defenseless civilians. The Hawkmoor War Alpha threw back his head and made a sound that was probably laughter but sounded more like the screaming of metal being torn apart. 30 seconds, he repeated. You have brought 400 small ships against 200 Hawkmoor warships, each one larger and more powerful than your largest vessel captain. Taeyun was monitoring communications from the enemy fleet, and she looked up from her station with worry in her eyes. Captain, the Hawkmoor are moving into attack formation, and their weapon systems are powering up. She reported. Admiral So Young's voice came over the fleet communication system one final time. All human vessels, this is your admiral. The enemy has chosen war over wisdom, and now they will learn why Earth is classified as a death world. The first shots came from the Hawkmoor fleet as their massive plasma cannons opened fire on the nearest human ships, but Commander Boram had positioned her stealth frigates perfectly, and they immediately began launching torpedo attacks from concealment, while the main human fleet scattered in all directions. Captain Kyung-ho watched in amazement as the human formation dissolved into what looked like chaos, but was actually a carefully planned maneuver that he had seen practiced dozens of times in simulations. The converted cargo ships and mining vessels began moving in unpredictable patterns, while broadcasting false sensor readings that made it impossible for the Hawkmoor to target them effectively, while the true warships used the confusion to close distance with the enemy major. Jinwoo's assault carrier Indomitable launched waves of human fighters that moved like a swarm of angry insects around the much larger Hawkmoor vessels, targeting their weapon systems and sensor arrays. With precision strikes, Lieutenant Min-Su was flying the lead fighter in the first wave, and his voice came over the communication system as he engaged the enemy all-fighters. "This is Lead. The Hawkmoor ships are big and slow, and their point defense systems cannot track our movement patterns." His fighter dove under a Hawkmoor heavy cruiser and fired a spread of micro-torpedoes into its engine section, causing massive explosions that left the enemy ship dead in space. "That's one down," Min-Su announced, and Kyung-ho could hear the excitement in his voice as he realized that the Hawkmoor were not as invincible as their reputation suggested. The battle began to turn as human tactics proved superior to Hawkmoor brute force, because while the enemy ships were larger and more heavily armed, they had been designed to fight opponents who used the same straightforward attack methods that the Hawkmoor preferred. But humans had learned to fight on a world where everything was trying to kill them, and they had developed strategies that emphasized speed and cunning over raw power. Captain Heijin's cargo hauler's steady hand suddenly revealed its hidden weapon systems and began firing missiles from concealed launchers, while using its massive cargo holds to launch clouds of metallic chaff that confused Hawkmoor targeting systems. The mining barge Iron Mountain moved alongside a Hawkmoor destroyer and used its asteroid-cutting lasers to slice through the enemy hull like it was made of paper, while its heavy armor shrugged off the return. Fire Commander Boram's stealth frigates appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking at Hawkmoor command ships, and then vanishing before the enemy could respond, while her torpedo attacks crippled vessel after vessel. War Alpha Gethekar appeared on the communication system again, but this time his voice showed confusion and growing anger as he watched his fleet being systematically destroyed by opponents he had underestimated. "How are you doing this?" he demanded. "Your ships are smaller and weaker than ours, but you fight like a pack of predators instead of civilized beings, Admiral." So Young answered him while her flagship engaged 3 Hawkmoor cruisers at the same time, using maneuvers that should have been impossible for a ship of its size. "We fight like humans. War Alpha and humans evolved on a world where cooperation and intelligence were the only ways to survive," she replied, "while you evolved on a world where size and individual strength were enough." The tactical display showed that the human fleet had destroyed over half of the Hawkmoor vanguard, while losing only a dozen ships, and most of those had been damaged rather than destroyed, because human rescue protocols meant that no crew was ever abandoned to die in. Space Captain Kyung-ho realized that he was witnessing history because this was the first time that humans had fought a major space battle against an alien enemy, and they were winning decisively against opponents who had conquered dozens of worlds the year. Remaining Hawkmoor ships began trying to retreat toward the edge of the system, but Commander Boram's frigates had positioned themselves to cut off escape routes, while the faster human vessels pursued the fleeing enemies like hunters chasing wounded prey. War Alpha Gethkar's ship was one of the last to be surrounded, and when Admiral So Young opened a communication channel to him, she could see that the creature was no longer confident and hungry, but desperate and afraid. "This is impossible," he said. "Your species should not be able to defeat us. We are the Hawkmoor Empire, and we have devoured civilizations older and more advanced than yours." Admiral So Young looked directly at him through the screen, and her voice was as final as death itself. "You made one critical mistake, War Alpha. She said you threatened innocent people under human protection, and now you are going to learn what that costs." The last Hawkmoor ship exploded in a ball of fire and plasma, and suddenly the space around the Velthari homeworld was quiet except for the gentle hum of human engines and the grateful transmissions coming from the planet below. Captain Kyung-ho looked at his tactical display and realized that the human fleet had just announced to the galaxy that there was a new power in space, and that power would not tolerate bullies or genocidal monsters. But he also knew that this was only the beginning, because somewhere in space, the main Hawkmoor. Admiral So Young stood on the command deck of her flagship, watching the tactical display show dozens of human ships arriving at the rally point every hour. As word of the rescue mission spread through human space like fire through dry grass, the first ships to arrive were military vessels that had been on patrol or training missions nearby. But within 6 hours, civilian ships began appearing too, cargo haulers, whose captains had volunteered their vessels, mining barges that looked more like flying cities, then warships, and even passenger liners whose crews had voted to join the fleet commander. Boram brought her squadron of stealth frigates in first, moving like ghosts between the larger ships as they took up defensive positions. Around the growing fleet, her ships were painted black and covered with sensors that could detect enemy vessels from incredible distances while remaining invisible themselves. Major Jin Woo arrived aboard the assault transport, indomitable, with 3 battalions of human marines who had been training for boarding actions and ground combat on hostile worlds. His soldiers were known throughout human space for their ability to fight in any environment, from the crushing gravity of heavy worlds to the zero atmosphere of deep space. What impressed So Young most was how quickly the civilian captains had adapted their ships for combat, because humans had learned long ago that in space any vessel could become a warship if you were creative enough. Captain He-jin brought her massive cargo hauler steady hand to the rally point. But when So Young looked at the sensor readings, she saw that the ship now carried missile launchers hidden in fake cargo containers and electronic warfare equipment that could jam enemy communications. When So Young asked how He-jin had acquired military-grade weapons so quickly, the cargo captain just smiled and said that humans had always believed in being prepared for trouble. The mining barge Iron Mountain arrived with its hull covered in improvised armor plating and its asteroid processing lasers recalibrated to cut through enemy ship hulls instead of rock. And when its captain reported ready for combat duty, So Young realized that the galaxy had no idea what humans were capable of when they decided to fight even. The passenger liner Star Dancer had been converted for war, with its luxury cabins turned into marine barracks, and its observation decks mounting point defense guns that could shoot down enemy fighters and missiles. As more ships continued to arrive, So Young walked through the corridors of her flagship and listened to the communications between the various captains as they coordinated their preparations for the journey to Velthari space. The military officers spoke in calm, professional voices as they discussed tactics and supply requirements, but the civilian volunteers talked with excitement and determination that reminded So Young why she had joined the fleet. In the first place, because humans had never been able to ignore a cry for help. She stopped at the communication center, where dozens of technicians were monitoring transmissions from across human space, and she could hear reports coming in from colonies and space stations telling her about more ships that were being prepared to join the rescue mission. "Admiral, we are receiving a priority transmission from Earth Fleet Command," announced Lieutenant Da-Yoon, who had transferred from Captain Kyung-ho's ship to help coordinate the massive communication effort. "Put it through," So Young ordered, and the main screen showed her the face of Fleet Admiral Tae-min, the highest-ranking officer in all of human space, who looked concerned, but not surprised by what was happening. "So Young, I have been monitoring your fleet buildup, and I wanted to personally authorize whatever resources you need for this mission." He said, "The government has voted unanimously to support the rescue of the Velthari people." "Thank you, Admiral," she replied. "But we both know that this could lead to war with the Hakmor Empire." Admiral Tae-min nodded grimly, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "The President has made it clear that humanity will not stand by and watch genocide happen when we have the power to prevent it. He said if the Hakmor want war with us, then they will get it." The transmission ended, and So Young felt a surge of pride in her species, because even though humans were still newcomers to galactic society, they had never lost the values that made them who they were. She made her way to the main briefing room, where the captains of the largest ships had gathered to discuss their strategy for the upcoming battle, and as she looked around the table, she saw military officers sitting next to merchant captains and mining foremen, all united by their determination to save the Velthari ladies. "And gentlemen," she began, "we are about to undertake the largest military operation in human history, against an enemy that has conquered dozens of worlds and eaten billions of sentient beings." Commander Boram leaned forward and asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Admiral, how many ships are we expecting the Hakmor to bring to this fight?" "Intelligence estimates between 800 and 1,500 combat vessels." So Young replied, "All of them designed specifically for war, while most of our fleet consists of converted civilian ships." Major Jin Woo spoke up from his position at the far end of the table. "What about the Galactic Council?" he asked. "Will they interfere if we engage the Hakmor?" "The Council has made it clear that they consider this an internal matter between humans and the Hakmor Empire." So Young answered, "Which means we can expect no help and no interference from other species." Captain Heijin looked around the room before speaking. Admiral, my crew and I have been talking, and we want you to know that every civilian captain here understands the risks, she said, but we also understand what it means to be human, and that means we do not abandon innocent people to monsters. The other civilian captains nodded in agreement, and So Young felt her throat tighten with emotion as she realized that these people were willing to risk their lives and their ships for aliens they had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. Our plan is simple, she continued. We will jump into the Kepler 442 system in 3 waves, with the stealth frigates going first to scout enemy positions and gather intelligence. Boram nodded and pulled up a tactical display showing the Velthari system. My ships can remain hidden for days if necessary, and we can provide real-time information about Hakmor ship movements and defensive positions. The second wave will consist of our fastest combat vessels and converted civilian ships. So, Young continued, their job will be to engage the enemy fleet and draw their attention, while the third wave brings in our heavy combat units and boarding craft. Major Jinwoo studied the display carefully before speaking. What about the Velthari civilians? Admiral, do we have any plan for protecting them during the battle? Captain Kyung-ho has been working with Velthari leaders to establish safe zones on their planet. So Young explained, and some of our ships will be dedicated to civilian protection rather than direct combat. The briefing continued. So Young watched the faces of her captains and saw the mixture of fear and determination that she recognized from her own reflection, because they all knew that they were about to face an enemy that was larger and more experienced than anything humans had ever fought before. But she also saw something else in their eyes, the same stubborn refusal to back down that had carried humans from the caves of Earth to the stars themselves. And she knew that the Hakmor had no idea what they were about to face after the briefing ended. So, Young made her way to the observation deck where she could look out at the growing human fleet and count the ships that continued to arrive every hour. The display showed her that they now had over 400 vessels of various sizes and capabilities, from massive battleships to tiny fighter craft, and she realized that this was the largest human fleet ever assembled in one place. She activated the fleet-wide communication system, and her voice was broadcast to every ship in the formation, people of the human fleet. She began, "This is Admiral So Young speaking, and I want to talk to you about why we are here." The communication channels fell silent as thousands of humans stopped what they were doing to listen to her words. 3 days ago, a species called the Velthari sent out a desperate plea for help because a race of monsters called the Hakmor is coming to eat them alive. She continued, the Galactic Council has refused to help, and the Velthari have no weapons to defend themselves. She paused to let that information sink in before continuing, "We are here because we are human, and humans do not abandon innocent people to monsters, no matter how dangerous those monsters might be." She said, "We are here because someone has to stand between the darkness and the light. And today, that someone is us." The communication system began picking up cheers and shouts of agreement from ships throughout the fleet as her words spread to every human in the formation. "Tomorrow we jump to the Kepler 442 system, where we will face an enemy fleet that outnumbers us 3-1. So Young continued, "But they have never fought humans before, and they have no idea what we are capable of when we fight to protect others." She looked out at the ships surrounding her flagship and felt a surge of confidence. That surprised her because she knew that every human in the fleet shared the same determination. "The galaxy thinks of us as Deathworlders because we come from a planet that would kill most other species," she said. "But tomorrow they will learn that being from a death world means we are very good at bringing death to those who deserve it." Captain Kyung-ho sat in his chair on the bridge of the exploration ship, Terra's Wrath, watching the stars drift past the main screen, when the communication system suddenly came alive with static and broken sounds that made everyone on the bridge turn their heads to listen. The voice that came through was high and musical, but filled with fear and desperation as it spoke in broken galactic standard, the common language that most space-traveling species use to talk to each other. But this voice was shaking, and the words came out wrong, like someone trying to speak a language they barely knew. "Please help us," the voice said over and over again, with long pauses between each word, as if the speaker was looking up each word in a dictionary before saying it. "Our world is in danger and we have no weapons to fight back. They are coming to eat us all and we have nowhere to run. Kyung-ho leaned forward in his chair and looked at his communication officer, a young woman named Da-Yoon, who was already working to clean up the signal and find out where it was coming from. Her fingers moved quickly over her control panel as she tried to make the message clearer. The signal is coming from the Kepler 442 system. Captain, she said without looking. Up from her work, it is about 3 days' travel from here at maximum speed, and the transmission is very weak, which means they are using emergency power, or their equipment is damaged. Play it again, Kyung-ho ordered, and the bridge fell silent as they listened to the desperate plea for help once more. This time Da-Eun had managed to clean up some of the static so they could hear more words. We are the Velthari people of the third world in this system, the voice continued. Our ancestors have lived here in peace for many thousands of years. We have never hurt anyone and we do not know how to fight. But the Hakamor fleet is coming, and they will be here in less than 3 of your days. Kyung-ho had heard of the Hakamor before, and the stories made his blood run cold. They were a race of creatures that looked like giant lizards walking on 2 legs with teeth like knives and claws that could cut through metal. They traveled from world to world, eating every living thing they could find, and they especially liked to eat other intelligent species because they said it made them smarter. The Velthari voice kept talking, and Kyung-ho could hear crying in the background, as if many people were gathered around the person sending the message. We have tried to contact the Galactic Council, but they say we are too far away and too small for them to help us. They told us to surrender, and maybe the Hakmor will let some of us live. But we know this is not true because we have heard what happened to the people of SciFiPrime and the colonies of the Outer Rim. Da-Yoon looked up at her captain with worry in her eyes because everyone in space knew what had happened to those worlds. The Hakmor had come, and when they left, there was nothing alive, bigger than an insect, and even the insects were mostly gone too. Our defense fleet is made up of mining ships and science vessels, the Velthari continued. We have tools that can move asteroids and equipment that can study distant stars, but we have no weapons because we never thought we would need them. Please, if anyone can hear this message, please help us. We do not want to die, and we do not want our children to be eaten. The message ended with a burst of static, and then silence filled the bridge as everyone tried to process what they had just heard. Kyung-ho stood up and walked to the main screen, where he could see the stars that surrounded them, and he thought about how many worlds might be out there right now sending out the same kind of desperate message with no one to hear them. Get me Admiral So-young on Priority Channel, he ordered. And Da-Eun immediately began trying to establish contact with the human fleet headquarters that was several hours away by faster-than-light communication. While they waited for the connection, Kyung-ho called up the star charts for the Kepler 442 system on his personal display and studied what they showed him. The system had 5 planets, but only the third one showed signs of life and civilization. According to the database, it was home to about 2 billion Velthari, who had achieved space travel about 500 years ago, but had never expanded beyond their own system because they were too peaceful and too focused on learning, rather than conquering. The display also showed him the projected path that a Hakmor fleet would take to reach the Velthari homeworld, and he calculated that if the aliens were telling the truth about their timing, then the attack would begin in exactly 68 hours and 13 minutes from now. Captain, we have Admiral So-young on the channel, Da-Yoon announced, and Kyung-ho straightened his uniform before walking back to his command chair. Because even though So-young was known for being informal, she was still the highest-ranking human officer in this part of space. The Admiral's face appeared on the main screen, and Kyung-ho could see that she was on the bridge of her flagship, Deathworld's Edge, which was one of the most powerful warships that humans had ever built. Her short gray hair was pulled back in a military style, and her dark eyes seemed to look right through the screen at him. Report, Captain, she said in the calm voice that she always used, no matter how serious the situation was. Kyung-ho quickly explained about the distress signal and played the cleaned-up version of the message for her, while she listened without showing any emotion on her face. But he could tell that she was thinking hard about what she was hearing because her fingers drummed silently on the arm of her command chair. When the message finished playing, Admiral So-young was quiet for a long moment before she spoke again. How many ships do the Hakmor have in their attack fleet? She asked. According to our intelligence reports, they travel in groups of between 500 and 2,000 ships, Kyung-ho replied, depending on how much resistance they expect to face. And the Velthari have no military vessels at all. None that would be effective against a Hackmore attack. Their mining ships are tough, but they have no shields or weapon systems that could stop even a small warship admiral. So Young nodded slowly, and Kyung-ho could see her making calculations in her head about distances and travel times and how many human ships were currently in the area. The Galactic Council has already refused to help, he asked, even though he already knew the answer from the Velthari message. The Council considers the Velthari to be an acceptable loss, she replied with disgust in her voice, because they are too far from the main trade routes, and their technology is not advanced enough to be worth protecting. Kyung-ho felt anger building in his chest because he had heard this same excuse too many times before. Whenever a smaller species asked for help against aggressive neighbors, the Council always found reasons why it was not their problem. "What are your orders, Admiral?" he asked. "Admiral." So Young looked directly at him through the screen, and he could see the determination in her eyes that had made her famous throughout human space. "Captain, you are to proceed immediately to the Kepler 442 system and begin evacuating as many Velthari civilians as possible," she ordered, "while I gather every available human ship in this sector." "But Admiral, one ship cannot evacuate 2 billion people," Kyung-ho protested. "I am not planning an evacuation, Captain," she replied with a cold smile. "I am planning a rescue mission, and if the Hackmore want to eat innocent people, they are going to have to go through the human fleet first." The transmission ended, and Kyung-ho stared at the blank screen for a moment before turning to his crew, who were all waiting to hear what they would do next. "You heard the Admiral," he announced. "Set course for Kepler 442 maximum speed and send a message to the Velthari, telling them that help is coming." As the Terra's Wrath changed direction and began accelerating toward the distant system, Kyung-ho wondered if they were making the right choice, because the human fleet was still relatively small compared to the major galactic powers, and taking on the Hackmore could mean war with one of the most feared military forces in known space. But as he listened to the Velthari message one more time, he knew that Admiral So Young had made the only choice that humans could live with, because if they did nothing, then 2 billion innocent people would die, and the galaxy would learn that humans were just another species that only cared about themselves. Instead, the galaxy was about to learn what happened when someone threatened people under human protection.